When the nice guy becomes a monster, the dark secret behind a covert narcissist's rage. So, let's talk about covert narcissism. It's a term that's floating around everywhere, right now, drifting through our conversations like a ghost. Everyone feels its presence, but hardly anyone can actually pin it down. To a researcher, this isn't just a personality quirk. It's the subterranean architecture of a person's mind. It's all those private, bitter thoughts and that silent sense of entitlement that haven't quite bubbled up to the surface yet. We can't see the gears of resentment turning inside their head, but eventually that internal pressure cooker has to vent. When it does, those hidden thoughts inevitably turn into overt actions. The sharp, mean-spirited comment at a nice dinner, or that huff of pure indignation when they have to wait 5 minutes in a grocery line. From a psychological lens, this is the moment an internal working model, which is fragile and insecure, mutates into an external defense mechanism designed to protect their ego at all costs. For you, the partner or friend, this creates a dizzying state of cognitive dissonance. You're stuck trying to reconcile the kind person you thought you knew with these sudden jagged edges of entitlement. To keep your sanity, you have to stop listening to the good intentions they claim to have and start looking at the actual, measurable impact their behavior has on your life. The brooding victim and the hidden mask. For a long time, people have used covert and vulnerable narcissism as if they're the same thing, but they're more like different threads in a very dark tapestry. The vulnerable narcissist is the brooder, the one who uses quiet hostility, passive aggression, and a perpetual cloak of victimhood to get what they want. They don't walk into a room with a megaphone like the grandiose types. Instead, they're often socially anxious, irritable, and frankly, less successful because they're too busy being resentful. Psychologically, they suffer from fragile high self-esteem. Imagine their ego as a glass sculpture sitting in the middle of a windstorm. It requires constant shielding from everyone else. This forces you into a role of intense emotional labor where you're constantly propping them up or managing their moods just to avoid a sullen outburst. Real healing for you starts the moment you realize you are not their emotional thermostat. You simply cannot regulate a temperature that they are subconsciously determined to keep it freezing. Then there's the even more insidious version, the hidden narcissist. This is the one who can stay dormant for decades. Maybe it's a 30-year marriage or a mother you've known your whole life, only showing their teeth when the audience has left the room. This is the narcissism of the closed door. In public, they're the pillar of the community, the helpful neighbor, or the perfect parent. In private, they are a total vacuum of empathy. This is impression management taken to a professional level. It's a survival strategy that lets them keep their social status while they devalue the people closest to them at home. The psychological toll on the victim is heavy, often leading to gaslighting-induced trauma. You start doubting your own eyes because nobody else sees what I see. Protecting yourself here requires breaking the seal of silence. You need to find a therapist or a rock-solid friend who can validate your reality outside of the narcissist's sphere of influence, the trigger, and the zero-sum game. What eventually unmasks a covert narcissist is the trigger, that specific moment when their fragile balance gets knocked off kilter. This usually happens when they feel their superiority is being threatened. It could be something as simple as you getting a promotion, a friend getting more attention at a party, or even you just having a really good day. Psychologically, the narcissist sees the world as a zero-sum game. If you're being praised, they feel like they're being erased. They lack what we call object constancy, which is the ability to hold on to the idea that you're a good person even when they're currently annoyed with you. For the person on the receiving end, this leads to that classic feeling of walking on eggshells, a state of constant hypervigilance that eventually fries your nervous system. One of the best ways to protect yourself is the gray rock method, by making yourself as uninteresting and unreactive as a plain gray rock. You deny them the emotional supply they're trying to provoke during these activations. Inside the narcissist, there's this roiling cauldron of inadequacy and unfairness. They genuinely believe life has cheated them, that their genius is being ignored, or that every joke is actually a secret insult aimed at them. While a healthy person might feel a sting of jealousy and then self-regulate, basically talk themselves down, a narcissist doesn't have that psychological scaffolding. They just project that internal rot onto you, making their bad mood your fault. Understanding that their rage is a reaction to their own internal incompetence is the first step toward emotional decoupling. You have to remind yourself, you didn't cause the storm, you're just the lightning rod they've installed to keep the fire off themselves. The shame cascade and the lack of cleanup. When a trigger finally hits, it sets off a shame cascade, so violent that the covert mask completely dissolves. This is when the misunderstood martyr disappears, and you're left facing primitive rage or the suffocating silence of a cold shoulder. This is a narcissistic injury, because their sense of self is built on the shaky ground of what others think. Any slight feels like an existential threat, what we call annihilation anxiety. To survive that feeling, they use projective identification, literally throwing their feelings of betrayal or inadequacy onto you. Suddenly, you're the villain in a script you never agreed to act in. You find yourself defending against accusations that are actually just their own internal demons. To protect your heart, you have to realize that those below-the-belt insults aren't actually about your character. They're just desperate attempts to move their pain from their chest into yours. The real difference between a person who is just struggling and someone who is narcissistic comes down to the cleanup. We all have bad days. We all have a shadow side that comes out when we're stressed. But a healthy person eventually feels ego-dystonic guilt, that this isn't who I want to be feeling. That leads to a real apology and an effort to fix things. A narcissist, however, doesn't see their outburst as a mistake. They see it as a justified response to your failure. Because they lack object constancy. You are the enemy the moment they are angry. The absence of a real apology keeps the wound open, preventing the emotional clotting. You need to move on. Recovery isn't about waiting for an apology that's never coming. It's about learning to validate your own experience and knowing that your reality is true, even if they never admit it. It's heartbreakingly easy to fall into the trap of rationalizing why someone treats you poorly, especially when they don't fit the villain stereotype. Covert narcissists often show up as these mild-mannered, sensitive, or even broken souls who just seem to have had a really rough go of it. You might find yourself whispering in the middle of the night they're just insecure, or they had such a hard childhood, using your own high levels of empathy to build a bridge over their toxicity. But here's the cold truth. In this specific dynamic, your empathy becomes a liability. It's the very bridge the narcissist walks across to pillage your emotional reserves. This is the foundation of a trauma bond, where you become addicted to the rare good version of them and start viewing the bad version as just a temporary glitch. Psychologically, you have to realize that their sensitivity isn't a sign of emotional depth. It's a symptom of a hyperfragile ego that can't handle the weight of real life. To protect yourself, you have to make a tough psychological pivot. You've got to stop being their unpaid therapist and start being your own advocate, recognizing that their past trauma doesn't give them a lifetime license to create yours. As the relationship moves along, a chilling pattern starts to emerge. Those peaceful gaps where things felt normal begin to shrink until they're almost gone. What used to be months of harmony turns into weeks, then days, and eventually just a few hours of an uneasy truce. This happens because the narcissist's hypervigilance is dialed up to 11, as their life or career inevitably fails to meet their impossible, grandiose expectations. They become incredibly thin-skinned. They start viewing every word you say through a filter of suspicion, which often spirals into pathological jealousy. Suddenly, you're in a paranoid rabbit hole where they suspect you of flirting, cheating, or conspiring against them. This is the cognitive genie that, once it's out of the bottle, refuses to go back in. For you, the victim, this creates a state of chronic stress where your nervous system is permanently stuck in fight or flight mode. Healing from this isn't just about moving on. It requires real physical and emotional distance to let your cortisol levels reset and to escape the bizarro world of their accusations. Eventually, you realize you're living in a double-bind paradox, a psychological prison where there are literally no right moves. If you walk on eggshells to avoid a blow-up, they sense your tension and get triggered by your judgmental silence. But if you stop walking on eggshells and actually speak your mind, they label you as aggressive or insensitive. You're living in a state of coiled tension, perpetually cleaning up the debris of their latest tantrum while already flinching in fear of the next one. But when you finally step back and look at the pattern, the triggers become crystal clear. You see a map of their insecurities rather than a list of your faults. Protecting your sanity means practicing emotional detachment. You have to learn to observe their shame cascades as if they were a passing storm you're watching from behind a thick glass window rather than standing out in the rain trying to stop the clouds from forming. Because these folks lack the shiny, arrogant grandiosity we see in movies, the relationship sits in this confusing gray zone. They seem more sad than scary, and that wounded soul act is the perfect bait for a high empathy partner. Psychologically, this is a form of altruistic narcissism, where their pain becomes the sun that the entire household has to orbit. It's a profound pity trap. You feel like your hands are tied because even when you decode their behavior as deep-seated insecurity, you can't actually call it out. To say, "I see that your anger is just a cover for your shame," is like dropping a match into a powder keg. The only real strategy here is radical acceptance of their limitations. You have to accept that they are psychologically incapable of processing the truth about themselves. Once you stop trying to help them see it, you reclaim a massive amount of your own energy. Unlike relationships with loud narcissists, where you might feel overt fear, the covert version thrives on guilt and self-blame. Because their shame is so visible, you end up feeling like the bad one for being frustrated or wanting to leave. They don't just occupy your house, they occupy your conscience. This is called introjection, where you start to internalize their low opinion of you and their high opinion of their own suffering. This is why these relationships are so hard to leave. You don't feel like you're leaving a partner. You feel like you're abandoning a victim. To heal, you have to realize that true empathy is a two-way street. What you're doing right now is pathological caretaking, where your best virtues are being weaponized against you to keep you small. Once you finally break the code and see which triggers set off their internal alarm, the relationship stops being a confusing labyrinth and starts looking like a predictable, albeit sad, script. Breaking the code doesn't necessarily make it easy to walk away, but it is a powerful antidote to gaslighting. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start observing, "Oh, they're feeling inadequate again." This is a huge step in psychological decoupling. It restores your sense of reality. You realize the silent treatment isn't a reflection of your worth. It's just a primitive defense mechanism they use to feel powerful when they feel small. The most haunting question for almost everyone in this position is, am I the narcissist? You see the moments where you snapped or the mean thing you said when you were exhausted, and you worry you're the problem. But this is usually reactive abuse, a psychological survival tactic where you start mimicking the abuser's traits just to cope with the stress. The real litmus test isn't the mess we make, it's the cleanup. A healthy person is capable of ego-dystonic guilt, that feeling that your bad behavior isn't who I am, which leads to a real, heartfelt apology. In the narcissistic pattern, there is no cleanup. There's only, "I didn't mean it," or "It's your fault I reacted that way." A healthy cleanup involves owning your part and listening to the other person's pain. If you're worried you're the narcissist, the very fact that you're capable of that painful self-reflection is usually the proof that you aren't.